Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode in the Chilling Tales archive series of real submission stories. Today's story comes from Indonesia, a place where people believe in gods but are also afraid of ghosts. The night there is not only dark early, but also dark and deep, so dark that it is like an invitation to the spirit world that has never been taken back, waiting only for a certain time to be opened again. Before I tell you the story, I would like you to remember this word, dukuan. It means witches, but it is more than just a wizard. In Indonesia, it is a kind of people, a group of people living between white and black. They can heal people, but also curse. They can call on gods, but also summon ghosts. Most Indonesians do not talk about them publicly, but almost everyone will secretly go to them at critical moments. Today's story is about a night when it was already too late before dukuan appeared. The contributor of the story is a young Chinese man who goes by the anonymous name Evan Lim. He said he was not born in Indonesia, but moved to Bandung with his parents from Hong Kong when he was 12 years old. The city is hot, humid, slow, and old. People pray devoutly during the day and whisper stories at night. At first, Evan was not used to it and always felt that the city was a little morbidly quiet. But as time went by, he gradually adapted to the rhythm here and made some local friends. The one he was closest to was Damar Yusuf, a classmate from school. Their friendship initially came from an inexplicable sense of mutual familiarity, as if they had known each other in a previous life. One day, Damar invited Evan to stay at his home for a night on the weekend, and the reason was simple. His parents made Indonesian chicken nasi lemak at home, and he wanted Evan to try it too. Evan remembered that evening. The sky was as dark as a pot of burnt soup. He followed Damar into the long and narrow townhouse, 2 floors. The front hall on the first floor was paved with green tiles, and outside the door was an alley without street lights. After dinner, the two of them went out for a walk as usual to digest the food. Just as they turned the corner toward home, things started to get weird. It was an old house next to theirs. A man stood at the door, smoking and not talking. He stood straight, as if he had been pulled out of the shadows. Evan couldn't see his face, only the cigarette but flashing in the darkness. Damar nodded and said hello to the man out of politeness. But the man ignored them, as if he hadn't heard them at all. He took the last puff of his cigarette and turned back into the house without looking back. Evan immediately felt something was wrong and asked Damar, "Is this your neighbor?" Damar shrugged and said casually, "I live alone. It seems like I've been like that all year round." He didn't explain much, nor did he show any uneasiness, but just continued to walk towards his home. Although Evan's heart was a little rippled, he thought that this was someone else's neighbor after all, so he didn't say much. He didn't know that he had been targeted by a certain existence that night. That night, Evan slept in the study on the second floor of Damar's house. It was a small room facing the street, close to the stairs, with windows facing the street, no curtains, and the light and darkness of the street were all visible. Damar made a temporary single bed for him and handed him a slightly damp, thin blanket. It was around 11 p.m. After playing games and taking a shower, the two returned to their respective rooms. Damar lived in the bedroom opposite, and the study became Evan's temporary place to stay overnight. The night in Bandung is very quiet, so quiet that it seems unnatural. Evan said he was sleeping soundly until he was awakened by a low-pitched cry. At first he thought it was an echo from his dream, but when he closed his eyes and lay there for a while, he found that the cry not only did not stop, but became clearer and clearer, and it was not just one person crying. That's a group of people. He heard the sobbing of women, the roaring of men, and the sharp, tearing cries of children, mixed together intermittently, sometimes far and sometimes near, as if someone was holding a dark funeral at the street corner downstairs. Evan felt an inexplicable restlessness, but he did not get up immediately, but turned over and buried his face in the quilt. But at this moment, bang! 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 There was a sudden loud noise coming from the window behind him, as if someone had hit the glass 3 times with his fist. Evan jumped up, cold sweat soaking his back instantly. He turned back subconsciously, and it was dark outside the window, but he could clearly see that half of the head of something had just left the windowsill and was slowly falling down. He didn't see the face clearly, only a shadowy outline, which quickly shrank back like an afterimage in some kind of reincarnation. His mind went blank for a moment. Yes, it was the 2nd floor. Not a first-floor window, not a ground-level balcony, it was the 2nd floor. No steps, no landing, nothing to step on. How did that thing get up there? He forced himself to sit up and slowly approach the window. He said that at that moment his feet felt like they were filled with lead and he could hear his knees creaking with every step. He leaned out and looked out. The street was still as dark as faded ink paper, but right in front of Damar's house, there stood a man. He just stood there with his back to their house, his back stiff, his head slightly raised, as if he already knew that someone would be watching him through the window. With the light of the waning moon, Evan confirmed that he knew this man. It was the neighbor who smoked at night and ignored people who greeted him. Evan secretly glanced at his phone. It was 2:17 in the morning. At this moment, an adult, not sleeping or moving, is standing in front of someone else's door, as if waiting or observing. Before he had time to think about it, the man, or the human figure, suddenly began to move. Not walking, but sliding. He didn't lift his feet, and his whole body seemed to be pulled by an invisible string, slowly and steadily floating across the street. And when he floated over, he actually raised his head and looked straight at Evan's window. Evan said that he couldn't see the man's eyes clearly, but he could feel a stinging gaze, which was not looking but penetrating. He suddenly retracted his head, his heartbeat reaching its limit. He wanted to hide in the bed, but his body seemed to be attached to that gaze, and he couldn't move. He could only lean against the window, holding his mouth tightly, not even daring to breathe. A few minutes passed, and he thought the thing had left, until he heard a sound outside the door. Boom, boom, boom. This time it wasn't the window, it was the door. Evan instinctively turned to the door, his palms sweating. The door panel was shaking slightly. The sound was neither fast nor slow, as if someone knew he was inside but didn't want to scare him, trying to confirm. He made no sound and did not move. After the knocking stopped for 2 seconds, a familiar voice sounded. "Evan, it's me. Can I come in?" It was Damar's voice, spoken in a low tone. like the kind of voice one would use at night to avoid waking up the family. Evan said that he felt relieved and almost responded, but just as he was about to open his mouth, some intuition made him swallow his words back. He remembered. Damar's room was opposite and the door was locked, and he slept in the study. The door was not locked at all. But now, why doesn't the Damar outside the door just push the door open and come in? Evan was still standing by the door, his legs stiff, his fingers pressed against the door, and he could almost feel the slight vibration coming from the wood at that moment. There was no more talking on the other side of the door, nor was there a second knock. But he could clearly hear the door handle moved. The clacking sound of the rapidly spinning metal was particularly harsh in the middle of the night. It wasn't an attempt to open the door. It was like something was frantically trying to twist it off. Evan held his breath for a second, and he knew the door was unlocked. In other words, as long as the person outside the door really wants to come in, there is no need to twist the door. A gentle push is enough. But instead of pushing it, it turned the handle frantically, as if it was imitating the act of entering a door without understanding the nature of the door at all. At that moment, he finally determined it wasn't Damar outside the door. Maybe it wasn't from the beginning. The doorknob suddenly stopped turning and was replaced by complete silence. It was so quiet that he could hear the pulsation of his own carotid artery. Boom, boom, boom. Evan didn't dare to move or shout. He just stood there, staring at the door, until a light sound of footsteps slowly drifted away from the door. He didn't dare to relax immediately. He waited until he was sure that there was no movement outside before he slowly, almost instinctively, moved towards the crack in the door. He didn't open the door, but just leaned against the wooden door and looked out. The crack in the door was extremely narrow, but he saw a figure moving at the end of the corridor. It was Damar, his friend. Damar was wearing a white t-shirt with his back to him and was pacing slowly in the corridor as if he was distracted. When Evan saw this, he felt relieved for a moment, but then all the hairs on his body stood up, because Damar's walking posture is not right. Not the look of someone who was drunk or half asleep, but a way of moving that Evan had never seen in real life. His steps were slow and sluggish, his spine leaned forward as if it had lost support, and his head was slightly tilted like a hanging puppet. Evan didn't dare to go out that night. He retreated to his room, put a chair behind the door, and didn't sleep all night. It felt like being trapped in a stuffy jar, and every second was compressed into a knife point. When day finally broke, he heard the clatter of pots and pans coming from the kitchen downstairs. Damar's parents had gotten up. He opened the door gently and leaned out. The sun shone through the gaps in the curtains, and everything seemed normal. He even had the illusion that last night was a dream. But when he was about to wake Damar up, he found that Damar couldn't get up at all. He is sick. He fell into a strange state, with a high fever and blurred consciousness, as if something inside his body was occupying his place. Evan told Damar's parents everything that happened last night. He was worried that they would think he was talking nonsense, but surprisingly, they believed it. Not only did he believe it, but he also quickly invited someone over. An old local man who looked completely different from his neighbors, leaning on a cane, wearing a black headscarf, and exuding a smell mixed with tobacco, mugwort, and coconut ash. Evan didn't understand who that man was until Damar's father whispered two words, Dukuin. Evan had heard the term before. He knew what it meant. This man wasn't a doctor. He was here to exorcise something. The Dukuin didn't say anything more, but just nodded after Evan described what happened last night. His eyes were very small, almost hidden by wrinkles, but for a moment, when he looked up at the second-floor window, Evan felt as if he could see something that he couldn't see during the day. It's not a disease. It's entering the body. The old man's voice was hoarse, but his words were as cold as a knife. He said that it was not an ordinary spirit, but a soul that died unjustly, a local male in his 30s who died unwillingly, with no one to offer sacrifices to his body, and his soul was trapped. He had been lurking in this area for some time, waiting for a container. Your friend's body was too empty and his soul was too loose. So, he came in. Evan suddenly remembered the details of last night. Damar was not possessed first, but seemed to be stared at by something. And this something, was it the man who stood at the street corner late at night and looked through the window? Dukuin nodded. You said that neighbor next door doesn't look like a normal person? Evan immediately chimed in. When we got home, he was smoking, and my friend greeted him. But he didn't respond at all, just stood there, and then went straight into the house. As the old man listened, he took out a string of red beads from his cloth bag and chanted an inaudible spell. He said that if the soul really came from that house, then it should be an empty shell now. Let's go and take a look. Damar's parents followed him to the door of the house next door. Evan said that it was the first time he saw an adult knock on the door in that way. Not with the back of the hand or the knuckles, but with the palm of his hand gently tapping the center of the door, over and over again, and each tap seemed to be communicating with another existence. No one responded. There was no sound of footsteps or breathing. The whole room was like a sealed urn, dead and silent. Dukuin narrowed his eyes, sprinkled a small circle of gray powder at the door, and then whispered, There is no one, but there is Call the police. No one expected him to say this, but he insisted that if there was still something in the room, the sunlight must be fully let in. Damar's parents contacted the local police and told them that something was wrong with their neighbor's house and no one had been coming in or out for a long time. A few hours later, the police broke into the house. Evan said that he would never forget the smell in the room at that moment. But the problem is, there is no stench of corpse. Even in a tropical hot region like Indonesia, if a body has been dead for more than a week, it is impossible not to smell it. But that day they saw a body that was so corrupt that it had broken apart. But there was almost no smell. That person was the smoking neighbor that Evan met last night. But he died long ago. Dukuin stood outside the house, looking at the body covered with cloth, and whispered. He practiced a forbidden ritual that used soul-calling techniques to attempt to summon a substitute. Unfortunately, he went too far and was eventually possessed by the devil. Damar's mother couldn't believe it. But he is a businessman. Why would he do this? Dukuin smiled coldly. You only saw how he did business, but you didn't see how he cursed at the door god after getting drunk. He had no money and no way out, so he took the last gamble. If you lose the bet, you don't lose everything, you give it all up. Only then did Evan understand that the person standing at the street corner last night was not a person looking at him, but the long-dead heart in the house, looking for a substitute with some unfinished thoughts. If he had opened the door that night, it might have been him. Duquin then performed a ritual at Damar's home. He did not use a knife or blood, but burned a pungent resin which he called benzoin, and lit it in corners, door frames, and bedside tables. After the ceremony, he placed a drop of red wax on Damar's forehead, saying it was soul-replacing fire. The next day, Damar woke up, looking weak but conscious, as if he had just recovered from a bad cold. Evan asked him if he remembered what happened last night. Damar said the only thing he remembers was being woken up by a knock on the door. He ignored it, but then heard Evan's voice. "Open the door. I forgot to bring water." That's why he got up and opened the door. But Evan clearly never said this from beginning to end. The story doesn't end there. Evan said that after that night, his awe of Indonesia was completely awakened. The wind in Bandung seemed to have become cooler since then. Even at noon when the sun was shining, he would unconsciously take a detour under the shadow of the banyan tree on the street corner. But what really changed his boundary between belief and disbelief was another incident that happened a few months later. An experience that was even more incomprehensible than the knock on the door at midnight. At the age of 21, he had already started helping his family run the fabric business. He often traveled to different regions to meet with clients. One time, he flew alone to a village in the interior of central Java to meet a young client named Rendi Wibowo. Rendi is about the same age as him, enthusiastic and talkative, always with a few brothers around him, with the style of a native village master. The two had a good chat at a barbecue stall in the town that night, and later went to a bar not far away. Although most parts of Indonesia restrict drinking for religious reasons, semi-underground places like this still exist, but they are hidden and low-key. When they were almost done drinking, it was already dark. Rendi suggested walking back to the village, saying that this way they would sober up quickly and enjoy the night breeze. But here comes the problem. The shortcut from the town back to the village is a small path through a banana grove. The villagers have a nickname for that place, Ghost Road. Evan didn't think much of it at first. He just thought that the forest was really quiet under the moonlight. Even the sound of insects could not be heard. And one of Rendi's friends, a thin man who was drunk, let's call him Adith, suddenly said he needed to go to the bathroom. "I'm feeling very uncomfortable. Let me solve it here." Before he finished speaking, another person next to him stopped him immediately. "Don't pee here, especially next to the banana tree. If something happens, don't blame me for not warning you." Adith looked disdainful. "Are you afraid that I will piss myself?" The others bowed their heads and said nothing, except Rendi, who managed to smile and said softly, "Don't be too loud. This forest is fine during the day, but you can't mess around at night." Evan asked, "Why?" Rendi did not answer directly. Instead, he took out his cell phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it under a thick banana tree. "I saw a small package wrapped in white cloth buried on the ground. with a few burnt incense ashes and a handful of red rice on it, and chicken feathers scattered in the corners. Someone is here to perform a ritual, maybe a dark ritual. That bag is either a curse or a substitute. Whatever it is, don't step on it. Adith sneered, staggered into the forest, and said, "Whether you believe me or not, I will spread the seeds here." Evan said that the moonlight was particularly bright that night, making the banana leaves glow green. But the deeper into the forest, the more the light was blocked. Adith walked less than 20 meters before he disappeared behind the shadows of the trees. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes passed. He didn't come back. At first they thought he was drunk and lying down asleep, but when they started calling his name, there was no response from the woods. It's not that he's ignoring me, it's that he's showing no sign of responding at all. It was as if the sound couldn't get through, and as if Adith was no longer on this side of the world from that moment on. "Adith, stop messing around and come out." Several people held up their cell phones and shone them into the banana forest. The beams of light penetrated the gaps in the forest, but could not illuminate the space 1 meter away. Evan described the forest as if something had eaten up the light, leaving only a depressing, echoless darkness. "Listen, there are no insects chirping." This was a sentence that Randy whispered, and the air froze instantly. In Indonesian villages, there should be insects, frogs, and wind even at midnight. But this forest was so eerily silent that even the wind didn't dare to come in. Evan finally realized that this wasn't just Adith joking. Something really happened. They decided to split up and search. They couldn't just go back to the village and report. Evan followed one of them and searched along the edge, trying not to go into the center, while Randy led another person to carefully go deeper into the forest. But strange things started happening. First, the phone stopped working. Just a few steps into the woods, Evan's phone suddenly shut down automatically, and the screen went black, as if the power supply had been cut off. He thought the battery was dead, but he remembered that it was still 40%. Even more strange was that another person's phone also went black at the same time, and even the light didn't turn on. They could only move forward in the dark. Next came the loss of sense of direction. They walked back and forth for more than 10 minutes, and when they looked back, they saw the banana tree they had marked earlier. Under the tree was a piece of incense ash package that had been stepped on and a handful of yellow rice, which were the talismans they had just carefully avoided. "This means that they are going in circles." Evan began to panic. He had never experienced such a scene that was out of physical logic. It was like being surrounded by a certain will and force to get lost. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from a distance. "Randy!" It wasn't Adith's voice. It was Randy who shouted, with a little haste and uncertainty. Evan and his companions immediately ran towards the direction of the sound, but they didn't run far before they saw a figure squatting under a tree with his back to them, seemingly looking at something on the ground. "Adith!" Evan blurted out. The figure slowly raised his head, without turning around, but just tilted his head towards them little by little. Randy suddenly rushed forward, pulled Evan back, and growled in a low voice, "It's not him. Don't come near." Evan was almost dragged to the ground by him, falling into the bushes, with a bloody cut on his ankle. But he didn't care about the pain. He only heard Randy yelling, "Run to the exit! Don't look back!" They ran desperately out of the forest, not daring to stop or ask, until they rushed out of the boundary of the banana trees and stepped onto the path again. The cell phones lit up again and the chirping of night insects came into their ears again. Only then they realized that it was already daybreak. Adith still not back. They didn't dare to go back to the village without permission, so they went to the village chief's house overnight to explain the situation. The next morning, the village organized a small search and rescue team to enter the forest. After searching for a whole day, they found nothing. No people, no footprints, and even the pile of banana leaves that Adith had stepped on when he came had returned to their original state, as if the forest had automatically erased all traces. On the third morning, they returned to Adith's house, only to find the door open. The house was empty, and all the chickens in the chicken coop were dead. There was no blood, only broken necks. Adith was sitting in the middle of the living room. He was wearing last night's clothes, covered in mud. His eyes were staring straight ahead, and the corners of his mouth were cracked all the way to his ears. The weirdest thing is that although he is still alive, he has a face that is not his. Evan said that, at that moment, everyone was stunned. Adith sat in the middle of the living room, his hands hanging down the side of the chair, his fingers stiff, the mud on his face not yet dried, but he was unconscious. He was not asleep, but seemed to be temporarily put into an empty shell. Randy was the first to rush over and call out to him, "Adith, can you hear me?" The face slowly turned towards them. Evan will never forget that moment. That wasn't Adith's real face. It looked like it was forcibly stitched together. The outline barely resembled Adith, but the facial features were misplaced, the pupils were white, and the corners of the mouth were unnaturally cracked, as if someone had torn it open from the inside out. It was a piece of attached face, not a living person. Randy was so scared that he collapsed on the ground, and Evan almost ran away. He only remembered Randy yelling, "Go find Dukuin." He didn't dare to look back, and didn't want to know what that face would do next. Less than half an hour later, an old man, revered as Paong by the villagers, arrived. He was wearing a linen robe, holding a wooden staff, with an ash bag and a chicken bone amulet hanging from his waist. He walked into the house without saying hello to anyone, as if he knew what he was facing. The ceremony inside the house began soon. Evan said he was standing outside the house, but he could hear noises coming from inside. Chanting, objects being thrown, wooden bowls being banged, and in between, there were low growls like those of wild beasts. Then, there was a scream so sharp that it almost tore the eardrums, like the painful wail of something being forcibly torn away from its body. Then, everything fell silent. Half an hour later, Paong came out, his face pale and his lips chapped. He said only one sentence to the crowd, "That's not Adith." Then he pointed to the house. "You should go to the hospital." They entered the room and found Adith conscious but obviously extremely weak. He had no recollection of where he had been for the past 48 hours. The only clue he could give was, "When I woke up, there were banana leaves all around me and there was a woman squatting in front of me, She had no chin. This sentence made the whole room silent for a moment. Pong explained that banana trees are typical carriers of Een in Indonesian folk beliefs and many black magic rituals, especially the art of summoning spirits, require that they be performed under banana trees. Under the tree is buried a person's name or shadow object, and when the target enters the tree's domain and defecates at night, it is equivalent to actively exchanging control of a part of the body. Once the host is physically weak or spiritually distracted, the spirit can forcibly take over the host. Adhit is lucky, Pavang said. The spirit is incomplete and can only stay for a short time. Once the sun rises, it must leave. Evan then realized that they did not save Adith that night, but just happened to meet the escape deadline. After that, they accompanied Adith to the hospital for a checkup, where the doctor found an early-stage tumor in his lung malignant. Although it was small, the consequences would be disastrous if it was delayed for a few more months. He underwent surgery and is doing well. Pong said the spirit left not because it was defeated, but because it knew it would not stay in this body for long, and so it chose to look for another target. And that target was almost Evan, because you are standing closest and because you see the most. After this experience, Evan did not set foot in the hinterland of the township for a long time. He said that he was still not sure whether he was really targeted, but during that time, he often heard footsteps outside the door in the early morning, and it seemed that someone was watching him behind the curtains. He didn't open the window, turn on the light, or ask, "Who is it?" He said he had learned one thing since then. In Indonesia, faith is a law of survival, not a folk interpretation. You may not believe it, but it is best not to challenge it. Because some taboos are not meant to be understood, but to be avoided. No matter where you go in the world, you must have due respect for local beliefs and traditions. Don't think that you can get away with it as long as you don't believe it. Every taboo that has been passed down for hundreds of years is not groundless. Well, today's story ends here. If you like this story, please remember to like and subscribe. If you have similar experiences or good stories, please share them in the comment area. I am Xiaomai, your most loyal friend, and I will always be here to accompany you in the form of stories.